Hey, Carmen.
Hey, Fryda.
Guess who's back?
Back again.
Take It Easy's back.
Tell a friend.
So, in the words of Eminem / Slim Shady, Take It Easy is back for a second season. And yes, we are so excited. And we are getting started with a radical topic. So, wow. How do we even do this again, Carmen?
Yeah, I forgot. It's like we took a hiatus and now we forgot how to do this. But, okay, guys. So, this episode is about El Comandante Che Guevara. Ernesto Che Guevara as an icon.
We are kicking off a season where we are going to be exploring a lot about artistry and iconography in the context of Cuba and Cuban American life, and what is one of the most popular images symbolizing revolutionary and radical politics that you can even think of. For me, it's definitely that image of Che Guevara wearing a beret and looking off into a distance. Why are we going into this topic of El Che Guevara?
So the year is 2009, and I'm at my very first college party, and I'm chilling, you know, relaxing all cool, not playing some b-ball, and some guy walks in with a Che Guevara t-shirt. And immediately it caught my eye because, number one, I'm Cuban, and number two, it's Che Guevara, and number three, it's a white guy wearing a Che Guevara t-shirt. And it wasn't very different from many of the times that I saw Che Guevara anywhere else, but suddenly some white kid walking into a party wearing a Che Guevara t-shirt had me feeling things that I had never felt before when I had seen Che Guevara's image. And I grew up seeing Che Guevara's image almost everywhere. Growing up in Miami, you're not really presented with people who are very different from your upbringing. So growing up with a bunch of Cubans, it never occurred to anybody to put Che Guevara on a t-shirt and walk around with it.
Carmen and I were both raised Cuban Americans in Miami, where the perspective of Che Guevara, I would say, is generally that this man was a very violent figure in the revolution.
It's the very first time I think that I was confronted with the fact that somebody else might have a different idea of what this image stands for. So let's get into the image. The image I'm talking about, I'm sure you've seen countless amount of times. It has been said that it is the most reproduced photograph of the 20th century. And it is the image of Che Guevara looking off into the distance. He's very serious. He's got long hair, and he's wearing a beret with a single star in the middle.
The image is called Guerrillero Heroico, or
heroic warrior. Yep. Wow. I had never translated that. And now as I'm saying it in English, it's even weirder. So it was taken on March 5th, 1960 in La Habana at a memorial service for the victims of La Cubre explosion. It was taken by a photographer named Alberto Corda.
And Corda is Castro's official photographer. So he is someone who was going around pretty much documenting the various exploits of young revolutionary Fidel Castro and the crew that he ran with.
Mm-hmm. And so this is 1960, just 1 year after the revolution. Almost 1 year, because March. But so La Cubre was a European vessel that was delivering munitions right to the port of Havana, which, if you know anything, and I don't really know anything, but if you know anything about how boats and harbors and ports work, you know that you don't unload munitions straight off of a boat onto a port because they can explode, which is exactly what happened. Interestingly enough, the Cuban government has presented this as an act of terrorism. Che, who was a trained medic at the time, came immediately to help the victims of the explosion, and also later was in attendance of this memorial service where there were other really famous people like Simone de Beauvoir and Jean-Paul Sartre, who were also photographed in this exact same role as Che. Fun fact, at this memorial, Castro gave a eulogy for these victims, and this is the very first time that we ever hear him say the phrase patria o muerte, homeland or death. Which is really relevant right now because one of the hottest songs coming out of the Cuban diaspora is by artists Gente de Zona, Yotuel, Decimer Bueno, Michael, y El Funky. These guys got together and made a song called Patria y Vida, Homeland and Life. As a matter of fact, there's a whole album by the same name. And it's a big statement on how the Cuban government has caused so much suffering to the people. But anyway, I digress. So Alberto Corda was photographing the event, not necessarily Che Guevara or necessarily the leaders or anything like that. He also had photos of Castro, of Simone, of Jean-Paul Sartre, everybody. And he took those images to the newspaper at the time of the revolution, and they didn't publish Che Guevara's image. In fact, Che Guevara's image was not really seen by anybody except for Alberto Corda.
Side note on Simone de Beauvoir and Jean-Paul Sartre. They hung around right after the revolution happened to take in like the revolutionary spirit. And Jean-Paul Sartre, after having some conversations with Che Guevara, he called him like the most complete man in existence. A couple years after the revolution, when they saw that Fidel Castro and the entire regime had actually imprisoned an artist that they knew, they condemned everything that Che and Fidel Castro had done during that time, saying like, you know, the people of Cuba do not seem joyous anymore. This is more of a dictatorship. So I think we can include that letter, but I think that it's interesting to see the way that Jean-Paul Sartre started to think about this man versus how he ended up thinking at least about the impact of the revolution in Cuba.
So this picture, I wanted to tell you about this scene because I wanted you to know exactly what was the moment that this photo was captured in. So this isn't Che Guevara looking off into, you know, some sort of battlefield or any other situation. This is Che Guevara likely looking at Castro, or likely looking at the scene of people who are mourning the loss of their loved ones. Also, the picture that we know right now is Che Guevara's image, and it's isolated. But the picture, the original one, had a palm tree to the right side and a random man's face ever so slightly out of focus in profile to the left side. And this is really important because the minute you crop that picture to isolate Che Guevara's face, that is when you take that moment and you separate it from history. That's when it becomes timeless, and that is when it becomes something that's transferable, something that's easy to photocopy and distribute, which is effectively how we got here to the t-shirt. The other key person in this distribution of this image is a man by the name Jim Fitzpatrick, who's an artist that met Che at a bar in Ireland and later came to Cuba and visited Alberto Corda, and he requested that he give him 2 copies of his photograph of Che. Jim Fitzpatrick took that image, stylized it, and altered it slightly. He put an F all the way to the right-hand side of the image, part of Che's shirt. If you're not looking for it, you'll never find it.
I didn't.
Yeah, we had to go over this for like 5 minutes. And so in doing this, Jim Fitzpatrick has effectively stolen that copyright. Now, this sort of raises the question of whether or not he's ever benefited or profited from it. We don't actually know. I'm willing to bet that he has. But this is really important because it was not supposed to have copyright. Under communist ideals, you do not have copyright. Artists don't exist in the same way that you and I maybe understand artists to exist, where credit is given to people when they make stuff. That just doesn't happen because images are thought to be free, to belong to the people, of the people, and by the people. And more than that, the state owns everything. It wasn't until 2011 that the family of Alberto Corda decided to start enforcing any type of copyright, which, by the way, is really tricky to do internationally because every country has a different take on copyright, what counts, what doesn't, and how to possibly combat it. But all of this to say that it is now one of the most identifiable symbols, and more than that, it's become a brand and a symbol, a North Star image for this sort of young, Marxist, leftist, activist person who is sort of screaming for change.
A moment of silence to appreciate the irony of the mass production of this image in a capitalist society.
Yeah.
When this man is either communist or Marxist, or some call him Stalinist, and would not have appreciated at least the marketing of his image. But I think this takes us perfectly well to the subject that we really also want to get into. When Carmen saw someone wearing this man's image on a t-shirt, she wasn't upset because it was a very capitalist thing of him to do. We grew up hearing about atrocities committed by this man. And so how could this man who committed atrocities also be so inspiring to so many people?
So let's talk about El Che and his beginnings. He was a Argentinian born to a well-to-do family. His family was very leftist, and eventually he went to school for medicine. I can't find any records of him having actually finished. And he went on this very famous road trip, which he journaled all the way through. And now there is a movie that is called The Motorcycle Diaries, because he got on a motorcycle with one of his friends and rode all the way up to Venezuela, and then I believe all the way eventually up to Mexico, where he met Fidel Castro. And that whole road trip, the whole purpose of it, he has written, was that he was in search for a cause. He was in search for something bigger than himself that he could be of service to.
So he wanted to find himself.
So he wanted to
on
find
a road
himself
trip,
in the middle
which,
of college.
We get it.
We get it. Cut to me in South Korea. I get it. All the way through this whole road trip in which he eventually found himself, he met all of these people with actual struggles and actual problems. From what I've read, in Bolivia, he showed up and wanted to stir up this militant militia guerrilla style revolution. But really, the people there were struggling workers who wanted to go about the revolution in a much different way. I'm not sure how you can call that revolutionary when you're just walking into some place, forcing your ideas onto a community, not understanding who they are and what they want for themselves. And I think this is a good time to start begging the question of, did he ever really consider that he could be an ally and what the role of an ally is versus being some kind of white savior?
We might be able to discuss that from the context of the Cuban Revolution.
So he gets to Mexico, where he meets Fidel Castro. This is before the revolution. He meets Fidel and Raúl, and there's a bunch of pictures of this meeting, actually, and of them talking. And he decides, I have found it. This is the cause that I have been searching for. And they decide to go back to Cuba and overthrow Batista. It's important to note the state of Cuba under Batista. So if we had to paint a picture, it was all of the glitzy, glamorous, romantic, beautiful, lively things that you all know of Cuba. So think Havana with the nightclubs and the casinos and all of the music and the rum and the rumba and all of that good stuff. But that only existed in the cities. Everywhere else was just this immensely poor, rural, sprawling country of people who were farming and were uneducated. These people we call guajiros. And so Che and Castro set out to level out the playing field, to bring communism to the country, and to make everyone equal, to give everyone opportunities and kick out the US, kick out imperialism. And in the aftermath of the revolution, many things happened.
After the fight is won and the revolution happened in Cuba, which, by the way, was a guerrilla-led coup d'etat, after that happened, the real work began. And part of the real work was retribution against people who did not support the revolution and people who were also involved in the regime of Batista. El Che was named the head of La Cabaña military fortress, where several hundred executions were carried out in the months after 1959. These executions did not have any trial and were pretty much by the whim of El Che, who he felt deserved death. And so there were innocent people executed, though I will say not in any large numbers, but it was hundreds. And there are enough accounts of El Che being an arrogant and just overall shitty person who killed a 14-year-old boy for trying to defend his father and another young boy that was 16 years old that Che Guevara refused to pardon. What I'll say about these executions